Hello, class. So today we're going to talk about the constitutional amendment process in Iowa specifically. Because Iowa does not have ballot initiatives, so our only form of type of direct democracy comes from these constitutional amendments. Okay, so 18 states allow citizens to directly amend the state constitution, and 49 states can have a constitutional amendment referred to the people to vote by the state legislature. Delaware is the exception, the only state that doesn't have the people in on this. And that threshold for success varies by state. Some, like in Iowa, require a simple majority. Others hit 60% or 2/3. So in Iowa, there are two processes that you can take for a constitutional amendment. Process number one in Iowa is that proposed amendments must start in the legislature. This cannot be a citizen-initiated thing. It must pass both chambers in 2 successive sessions with an election in between. So, the Iowa House is elected every 2 years. Everyone's up. So, if a party gets into power, they have this idea about a constitutional amendment. Okay? They can pass it. One year, they can't pass it the next year. I mean, they could, it just wouldn't matter. And say there's some political backlash, there's a new election, a different party gets in power, then that process is dead. So it basically means that you pass it, there's another election, so it gives the people another chance to kick everyone out if they want, and then they go for a second one. If it passes, it will be on the ballot in the next general election. So that's presidential or midterm for like governor, and a simple majority amends the Constitution. Process number 2, which is the Constitutional Convention question. So starting in 1970, a question asking whether or not to hold a Constitutional Convention must automatically appear on the ballot every 10 years. And so if a convention happened, everything would be up for grabs when it came to changes. Okay? Anything in the Iowa Constitution, it could completely redo the whole system. However, that's really open-ended, and in general, voters aren't that interested in it. In 2020, when there's the vote for a constitutional convention question, yes got 29.58%, and no got over 70%. Yes did not win any counties. There was not even really a strong correlation between yes and no votes between Donald Trump or Joe Biden. The public's been pretty skeptical of that type of change. Now, so if we see some more amendments, it's more likely to be through the first process. Now, let's consider some of the amendments that have happened in Iowa history and like why that may have been a thing. Like, why would you need to possibly amend the Constitution, the state constitution? That seems like a big deal. So the first amendments were sent to the voters was in 1868, and there were 5 amendments that removed the word white from several places in the state constitution. This is right after the Civil War. There are now freedmen. You're having African Americans in Congress for the first time. And so the way that the Iowa Constitution was originally written, it didn't imagine anyone but white men being involved in all these roles. So they needed to find a way to amend that to deal with progress. 1882, this was added upon by removing the phrase free white from a requirement to be in the legislature. Okay, this type of changes. There's also it can deal with social issues. And so a big social issue in the late 1800s into the 1900s was alcohol and prohibition. So in 1882, there was a constitutional amendment that was voted on to ban alcohol. And this actually passed by the people, 55% yes, 45% no. However, this got overturned by the Iowa Supreme Court because the legislature had not dotted their I's and crossed their T's. There was some procedural issue with how they had put it on the ballot. In 1917, there's another vote to ban the sale of alcohol. And this was incredibly close. 49.89% yes, 50.11% no. Now, the federal prohibition happened soon after. And so, as they're about to go get rid of prohibition, they gave it to the citizens of Iowa to decide how they're going to do this. And so, to bring back alcohol in 1933, over 60% yes, and 40% no. There are some counties that were near 90% yes or to no. It really varied based on this. There are other things, such as there were constitutional amendments to give bonuses to soldiers, okay, or a raise is extra money to veterans of wars. So in 1922, they voted on this for World War I soldiers. It passed with 66%. In 1948, they did it for World War II soldiers. It passed with around 78%. And in 1956, it went for Korean War soldiers, around 76%. Yes, okay, these are things that are winning every single county. And there are other states that had similar measures that actually failed during these periods of time. There were also several attempts to get a state-level equal rights amendment to say that men and women are equal in the stance of Iowa law. And so they first tried this in 1980, and it fails. Almost 56% say no. In 1992, they try this again, fails again. 48% yes, 52% no. And the wording of this is a bit different every time. So in 1998, they worded it in basically a way, should Iowa treat men and women equally in regards to the law, and it passes really easily. It had kind of subsided as the same type of social issue. There are other things where you might just simply need to change the structure of government. So previously, the governor and lieutenant governor were elected separately, which meant on a couple occasions you would have a Republican governor and a Democratic lieutenant governor, or vice versa. And so this gave kind of a weird incentive, right, to change the governor, perhaps by bad means, because that might change their politics. And so in 1988, it went to the voters, making it that the governor and lieutenant governor would now be elected together. And this passed overwhelmingly. Again, see why you might need to have this type of a system. But it's given to the voters, so it makes it so the government isn't just changing the rules of its structure to benefit itself. Everyone has a say, but it's relatively easy compared to the U.S. Constitution to make these type of changes. There are other ones, like the original Iowa Constitution said that you were disqualified from being in state government and holding public office if you had been convicted of dueling. Now, no one had been convicted of dueling in over 100 years by 1992. But they put this in. And there were counties that voted no. 57% said yes on this to remove the rule that if you've been convicted for dueling, you couldn't be in the legislature. Again, it's one of those things where the Constitution, state Constitution, is an old document. Like, this is an old thing to be concerned about. People aren't concerned about that now. And the most recent one was an amendment about guns, and it kind of created a state-level Second Amendment. Most states have this. Iowa was one of a handful that didn't have some sort of state-level one. And it's kind of unnecessary in the fact that, like, the actual Second Amendment of the federal Constitution is what is protecting these type of things. But it does make it so essentially there would be strict scrutiny on any type of new gun control legislation passed. And this passed with 65% of the vote. It only failed in 2 counties. It was relatively depolarized, despite the party's general sentiments about guns. So that is how the constitutional amendments work in Iowa. A possible one that may come into the fold is there could be a constitutional amendment about abortion coming up in 2024, as the most recent ban passed by the legislature is tied up in the courts. They already passed this once. They need to pass it again, but it could be on ballot in 2024, and it could decide whether or not their abortion is allowed in the state. So this will continue to be something that some social issues are going to get involved.